Next speaker, I want to thank for having agreed to come on short notice, because I don't know if any of you saw the news last week. There was an announcement about the flood levee certification initiative in the city of Binghamton, and I contacted Mayor David's office, and he said he had a meeting with Governor Cuomo that he was canceling to be here with you today. I just made that up. So, but anyway, I'd like to welcome, help me give a warm welcome to Mayor Rich David.
Good afternoon, everyone. How are we doing today? I appreciate the opportunity to be here to talk about an issue that I know many of you are very familiar with, and that has to do with the flood walls and levee system that exists not only in the city of Binghamton but across Broome County. So just to start off, I think many of you already know why this is such an important issue, and I just want to talk a little bit about the timing of why we're talking about this now, because this is an issue that many people have really talked about for a long period of time. So why are we moving forward now? Why hasn't things been done in the past? So I can really talk about the city of Binghamton, but as you know, there are flood walls and levees that extend outside of the city of Binghamton. So in the city, there are approximately 6.7 miles of flood walls and levees, and it's basically split 50-50 between flood walls and levees. And over the past few years, we've been working with the Army Corps of Engineers, the DEC, and FEMA. And what has allowed us to move forward now is the fact that the Army Corps and FEMA have submitted draft studies with regards to different sorts of analysis and reviews that they're doing with regards to the flood walls and levees. And the significance of that is that, as you know, FEMA is in the process of updating the flood map. And the information that is on file right now dates back to approximately the 1970s, right? So if the city were to begin this process or try to begin the process of inspection and certification prior to these draft reports being done by FEMA and the Army Corps, what the city would have had to do was recreate and duplicate and pay for everything that the Army Corps and FEMA is completing for us right now. That really is the first step, and that is why we hadn't moved forward previously, and really why a previous administration couldn't move forward either. And so it's been a very long process with the Army Corps and FEMA, who told us, I believe 2 years ago, that what they are completing now was supposed to be done 2 years ago, and it is now being submitted in its draft form, but should be finalized soon. And obviously, we know what's included in that draft information. So the fact that the Army Corps and FEMA have now submitted those, that provides us with a great deal of new information, updating what's on record from the 1970s that allows us now to move forward. And so the challenge obviously has been that if your flood walls and levees are not accredited by FEMA, they will essentially be viewed as non-existent. And so all of the properties that are located behind the levee and the flood wall, as far as the government is concerned, are unprotected in the event of a flood, which means property owners have to buy flood insurance. And as you know, flood insurance is not cheap, and in basically all situations, it is more than what your mortgage and taxes would be. So clearly that is not something that is financially viable or realistic for anyone to do. So that's why we've been working in conjunction with FEMA, the DEC, and the Army Corps. And of course, the DEC is really the liaison between the Army Corps and many of the local municipalities, because the flood walls and levee systems, the flood walls were built by the Army Corps of Engineers. So what we are able to do now is we've hired a firm called Tetra Tech. This is a firm that has experience working with cities large and small across the nation, doing the inspections and certifications so that you can get your flood wall and levee system accredited. They've worked with cities larger than Binghamton, cities smaller than Binghamton, regionally in Tioga County, the town of Nichols. They were able to work to get those levees accredited within the last few years. Nichols doesn't have any flood walls, but they do have levees. And so what this phase is right now is that the team from Tetra Tech and engineers, they'll go out and they will literally do inspections of the 6.7 miles worth of flood walls and flood levees. And basically one of two things is going to happen, right? And we expect a combination of things to happen. Some of the flood walls and levees we expect to be inspected and certified in their current condition, which means that they will be able to be accredited. We expect some will not pass inspection and be certified, and in that case, Tetra Tech will come back to the city, identify what the deficiencies are, and work with us on a plan for remediation. And probably most important, where do we get the funding necessary to pay for any sorts of upgrades or to fix the deficiencies? Because one of the things that's obviously very concerning to us is when you talk about major infrastructure projects, you're not talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars or tens of thousands of dollars. You're talking about millions of dollars. And you're also talking about millions of dollars into an infrastructure system with which the city doesn't own. So that means even if we wanted to, which we don't, but even if we wanted to, we couldn't go out and borrow money because we don't own the flood walls, nor do we want ownership of the flood walls so that we are responsible for continued maintenance down the road. And so there's a laundry list of possible solutions depending on what the deficiency is. I think when most people think about these flood walls, you flash back to 2006 or in the city of Binghamton, 2011, where there were approximately 7,000 properties that were impacted in the 2011 flood, and approximately 2,000 of them were in the city of Binghamton. And for anybody that drove through downtown or was familiar with downtown, the water was literally at the top of the flood wall, and in some cases was slightly spilling over the top of it or the side of it. And so one of the things that FEMA and the Army Corps examine is what's called freeboard, right? And so freeboard is basically the distance between the top of the flood wall and the top of the river during a flood scenario. So if the river is overflowing the top of a flood wall, that means there's zero freeboard. There are many times when the river is elevated and there is a distance between the top of the river and the top of the flood walls, and that's what freeboard is, right? So a lot of times people may just say, all right, so does that mean that you just have to raise the flood walls? Do you have to increase them, which would be a very costly and expensive undertaking? In some cases, that may be what needs to be done, but there's also a variety of other steps that can be taken depending on what the deficiency is to put in additional safeguards to protect against future flooding. We don't know what needs to be done yet. That's why we're going through this process right now. But the most important thing is that we are now finally able to move forward. And so earlier on, what we did is we were working with Broome County and several other local municipalities where our flood walls and levee systems, our neighbors in essence, as they leave the city of Binghamton, the levee system continues. But one of the things that we wanted to do in Binghamton was to be very proactive, because we knew, even though the state and federal government were several years late with regards to when these really complex and time-consuming studies were going to be complete, we wanted to be ready as soon as these documents were submitted. So several years ago, we started saving money. Our city council was supportive of our concept to create a reserve account specifically for this purpose, where we were able to put away several hundreds of thousands of dollars into a reserve account specifically for the accreditation of our flood wall and flood levee system. And so I appreciate the fact that City Council supported us on that undertaking, which is why we were able to now move forward with phase one, which I believe is just under $200,000 to hire this firm and do this first step, and there will be several steps along the way. But if I were one of the property owners that lived, behind a flood wall or levee system and was facing this sort of scenario, I think it's extremely scary for the homeowners from a financial standpoint, from a public safety standpoint, from a property resale standpoint about what this is doing to the value of your properties. And this really is such a technical process. And right, we're in 2020 right now, and the flood happened in 2011. I mean, that's a nine years. What are people doing to address this issue? And it's a question that I've been asked a lot, and I can certainly understand that. And from my standpoint, I think we've positioned the city to move as quickly as possible once this information came in. We're the first municipality out of the gate to be able to move forward with this process. I'm going to assume that there are people in the room outside of the city of Binghamton or who are representing property owners outside the city of Binghamton. I'm not sure at this point what the other municipalities are doing with regards to their plan, because they have to do the same thing that we have to do, and it's going to be costly. And this is just the first phase for the city. We expect to spend several $100,000 more with regards to additional steps to get our inspection and certification process done. In the city, we're told that it's basically three separate systems, for lack of a better description, three separate areas that comprise flood wall and flood levees. So these three separate systems that exist within the city can be accredited in whole or in part, which is good news, and we certainly expect that to happen. As far as the timeline, it is literally underway right now and has been started, and we expect sometime in May for this first step to be complete, and of course, information made available to the public. And so what we expect at that time would certainly be a report on what has passed and what can move on towards accreditation, and where there are deficiencies. And then the next step would be to isolate those areas. In a step two, we're solely focusing on the deficiencies and work on identifying different scenarios that will bring those areas into compliance. Not all of them would necessarily be extremely costly, but I anticipate in a flood wall system that's almost 100 years old, or approximately 100 years old, that there's going to be some significant money that needs to be invested, and that's another reason why we have a firm that has a track record of working with municipalities to ensure that, or to at least position them well and help them get money for these costly undertakings. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, where we are with the City of Binghamton, what we announced last week. If anybody has any questions on what we're doing or things I didn't cover on that, I'd certainly be willing to entertain a few questions. Yes, sir, go ahead.
Mayor David, did you say that the city doesn't own the flood walls?
The city does not own the flood walls. They're
Who does?
the Army Corps of Engineers, the federal government, and
So
so.
if there's any repairs to it, then is the Army Corps of Engineers?
Well, we would like to think that. So what's happening right now is the federal government is really in the process of trying to transition ownership of that infrastructure to the municipalities. So no, the Army Corps of Engineers, the federal government owns them. It's in a way like how the railroads are its separate entity. The flood wall structure is very similar to that. You can't touch it. A lot of times people ask in Binghamton where there are cracks or it's blighted, can't you just paint it? Can't you just, to make it look better? You literally cannot touch those walls without the permission of the federal government. And the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, they are even though they're a state agency, they are the local liaison between the federal government and the municipalities. So the bulk of our interaction is really with the Department of Environmental Conservation.
So where does the money come from to fix whatever needs to be fixed?
That's a great question.
Can you repeat the question?
So the question was, where is the money going to come from to fix the flood walls or flood levees? We would like that money to come from the federal government. That is what our approach is going to be, and that's a question that needs to be answered as part of the process. So one of the things that this company does, and one of the reasons why we went with Tetra Tech, is because several individuals who work are in leadership positions of this company come from the federal government. They used to work for the Army Corps of Engineers. So they know the internal roadmap of the federal government. And one of the things that we're paying them for is not only to hand us a plan that says, okay, here's what passed, here's what doesn't, have a good day. They say, okay, here's where your deficiencies are, and here's a course of action for you to take. Here's where you can get state and federal funds for remediation. And that's, equally important. Because I can tell you right now, and it shouldn't be a secret to anyone, the city of Binghamton does not have the money that I'm sure is going to be needed to fix a flood wall and levee system that it does not own. So typically what happens, that money would come from the state and federal government, and that's where it has come from in other municipalities. And so one of the things I think they will look at, and I'm trying to think of some of the specific examples they gave me, but it's not just going to be you have to raise the flood wall. There are other sorts of things they can do in and around the flood wall itself to make it in compliance. It might be raising a road, it might be doing something else to a levee system. It's not just, okay, you have to raise the flood wall, although that may be the only thing that can be done in some of the situations. But there's a variety of things that can be done.
One more question, last question, go ahead.
About a year ago, Jim and I went to some meeting that FEMA ran over at the college, where a bunch of engineers from
The university, right? Binghamton University?
university. Was
Yes,
you there?
I was.
Okay, most boring meeting in the world, but 15 guys got up in a row and then said, oh, there's 600 feet of wall and it's okay. There's 500 feet of wall and it's okay. What was that?
Right, so that was the FEMA and the Army Corps of Engineers and the DEC all had reps at that meeting. And so these two extremely in-depth studies that have now been submitted in draft form or about to be submitted in draft form, that was a prelude to those studies. And so there's also a third kind of process or project that's out there. It's called the LAMP study that we've been working on with Broome County, Levee Analysis Mapping Project. And so basically what that is you're looking at the entire region. And so yes, I'm here talking to you about Binghamton, but if there's a breach in Johnson City or Port Dickinson and water comes in, it's going to flow into a variety of different municipalities. So one of the main focuses of that meeting is they were running scenarios of breaches, and you could see what areas of the region would be flooded if there were breaches in levees and flood walls. I don't know if you saw any of that, but there was a lot of discussion about where the systems are, what it would look like if there were breaches in specific areas, and what areas would get flooded. And then there was a lot of discussion as well about the study that the Army Corps of Engineers was doing and that FEMA was doing, and when those studies were going to be done. Because at that meeting, I think it was around the spring or summertime, they said it was going to be done either that year or earlier the next year. And that, as you indicated, was 2 or 3 years ago. So, but I will say that information, it was very important and part of this process, because without the information in that meeting you're talking about, the municipalities would have had to hire consultants and engineers to do exactly what the state and federal government just did. And we would have had to spend, I think it would have been in the millions myself. It would have been over $1 million to recreate that data to allow us to move forward.
All right, thanks.
We got to do one more, just real quick.
Anything we can do as, the community? I mean, this isn't a question of
we gotta do this, we gotta help those people. I mean, it shouldn't be, you know what I'm saying? We gotta do.
Absolutely. Call your congressman and call Chuck Schumer and Gillibrand. I'm not even joking when I say that, because the money is going to need to come from the state and federal government, and the state has really been more receptive, or at least more accessible in this.
We need a call to action on that, we need to do it.
I agree. I agree. I appreciate that. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. And I'm going to say, if anybody has more questions about this or wants to talk about this in greater detail, you should feel free to call me at City Hall. I'd be happy to meet with anyone individually or with a group of people that may want to sit down and have more questions about this. So feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to talk about this further.